When I bought the old Langford place at the end of Briarwood Court, everyone said I was crazy. The house had been sitting empty for 5 years, its shutters hanging crooked, weeds waist high. The driveway was cracked, the roof sagging, and rumor had it that the HOA had been itching to condemn it just to stop it from bringing down property values. But I saw potential. A huge backyard, solid bones under the peeling paint, and enough space to turn it into the kind of home I'd always wanted. I closed on it in May, and by July I'd already ripped out the worst of the overgrowth, replaced the roof, and hired contractors to rebuild the deck overlooking the backyard. I didn't have much interaction with the HOA during those first few months. They sent me a few letters, mostly nitpicky nonsense about my temporary dumpster being unsightly, but I ignored them. I paid my dues, followed the actual rules, and minded my business. Everything changed one Tuesday afternoon in September when a man in a suit knocked on my door. "Afternoon," he said with a polished smile. "I'm Greg Madsen, the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association." I leaned on the doorframe. And I wanted to confirm details for Saturday's event," he said, flipping open a clipboard. "The caterers will arrive at 9, the florist at 10, and the band will do their sound check around noon." I blinked. "What event?" "The Whitaker wedding," he said, like it should have been obvious. "The ceremony will be in your backyard," I laughed, an incredulous bark of a laugh. "No, it won't." His smile froze. "I'm sorry?" "You heard me. Nobody asked me about this. Nobody has permission to use my backyard for anything, let alone a wedding." Greg's expression turned condescending, like a teacher talking to a slow student. "Mr. Collins, the HOA has long-standing agreements with vendors for community events. Your property's backyard is designated as a common-use green space under the neighborhood bylaws. It's been used for Easter egg hunts, barbecues, and yes, weddings for decades." I crossed my arms. "That might have been true when it was vacant. It's not vacant anymore, I own it, and nobody is setting foot in my yard." Greg's smile vanished. "You can't just—" "I can," I said, and shut the door in his face. I thought that would be the end of it. I figured he'd tell the couple to move their wedding to the clubhouse lawn or the park down the street. But 2 days later, a delivery truck showed up with rented chairs and tables. When I went outside to stop them, the driver handed me a clipboard. "Delivery for the Whitaker wedding," he said. "You're trespassing," I told him. "Unload those and I'll have you arrested." The driver blinked, muttered something under his breath, and drove off. That evening, Greg returned, this time with 2 other board members in tow. "You are interfering with a legally scheduled HOA event," he said coldly. "If you don't cooperate, we'll fine you $200 a day and seek an injunction." I stepped out onto the porch, hands on hips. "Go ahead, fine me. Then get ready for a lawsuit of your own, because this is private property now. You don't have the right to use it without my permission." One of the board members, a woman with a clipboard, said, "The bylaws clearly state—" "The bylaws don't trump a deed," I snapped. "Show me one line in my closing documents that says the HOA owns my backyard." They had no answer for that. But the next morning, I woke to find a printed notice taped to my door. "Notice of community event. Your property has been reserved for September 17th, 9 a.m., 9 p.m. Unauthorized interference will result in fines and legal action." I ripped the paper down and crumpled it in my fist. By Thursday, tents were being set up on the common lot across the street. Guests were being told to park along the cul-de-sac. It was clear the HOA had no intention of backing down. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, digging through county property records. After 2 hours, I found exactly what I was looking for: my deed, my plat map, and my title insurance policy, all confirming that the backyard was mine. There were no easements, no covenants granting public use. I didn't just have the right to kick them off. I had the right to make a statement. Friday morning, I made a call to a contractor friend who owed me a favor. "Can you get me a bulldozer for Saturday morning?" I asked. There was a pause on the other end. "You planning to level something?" "Just my backyard," I said with a grin. "I'm thinking a nice big trench where they want to put the altar," he laughed. "You're insane." "But yeah, I can have one there by 8. That night, I slept like a baby for the first time all week. Saturday dawned clear and sunny, exactly the kind of day you'd want for a wedding, if you were having one. I was having something else entirely. At 7:45, A flatbed truck rumbled down Briarwood Court with a yellow bulldozer chained to the back. I stepped outside with a mug of coffee just in time to see Greg sprinting down the sidewalk in his golf shirt and khakis, waving his arms. "What is this?" he shouted, red-faced. "This?" I said innocently. "This is a perfectly legal landscaping project on my private property. You can't start construction today." "There's a wedding scheduled." "Not on my land, there isn't." Greg stood in the middle of my driveway as the truck driver unloaded the bulldozer. "I'm calling the sheriff," he said. "Go ahead," I said. "I'll show him the deed." By the time the bulldozer rolled into my backyard, half the neighborhood had gathered to watch. People leaned over fences, clutching coffee cups, murmuring to each other like they were at a live taping of a TV drama. I climbed up into the cab, turned the key, and felt the machine rumble beneath me. It was ridiculous, exhilarating, and completely petty. Exactly what the situation called for. I started slow, scraping a shallow trench right across the middle of the lawn where they'd set up folding chairs overnight. The sound of tearing grass and crunching soil echoed across the yard. Greg was on the phone, pacing furiously. At 8:30, the first wedding vendors arrived, a florist with buckets of white roses. She took one look at the bulldozer and refused to get out of her van. "I can't set up in that," she shouted at Greg. "Don't worry, we'll have him stopped," Greg said, gesturing helplessly. I waved at her from the bulldozer cab.
"Sorry, private property?"
At 9 sharp, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up. A tall deputy stepped out, adjusting his hat. "Mornin'," he said, clearly trying not to laugh. "Got a report of a disturbance?" "Yes," Greg said, nearly tripping over himself to get to the deputy. "This man is destroying HOA property." The deputy turned to me. "Sir, is this your land?" I hopped down and handed him a folder. Deed, title, and plat map all current. No easements, no public rights of way. They're trespassing. The deputy flipped through the papers, nodded, and handed them back. "Looks legit to me. Are you just going to let him do this?" Greg sputtered. The deputy shrugged. "It's his yard. Unless you've got a court order, there's not much I can do." By now, the bride and groom had arrived, a young couple in matching white shirts and khakis, looking horrified. The bride clutched a garment bag, tears in her eyes. "Where are we supposed to get married?" she wailed. "Not here," I said flatly. "You're ruining our special day." The groom shouted. "No," I said, shutting off the bulldozer so they could hear me clearly. "Your HOA is ruining your day. They had months to tell you they didn't have the right to book this yard. They lied to you." The bride turned on Greg. "You told us it was all arranged." Greg's face went an alarming shade of red. "It was arranged."
"He's just being unreasonable."
I spread my arms to show the torn-up lawn. "Does this look like I'm being unreasonable?" The deputy cleared his throat. "Folks, I suggest you move the event to the park. It's a public space, no one's going to stop you there. But moving a wedding isn't like moving a picnic." The guests were already arriving, cars clogging the cul-de-sac. Caterers were pulling up with trays of food. The band was hauling speakers out of their van, and I, petty king of my newly defended castle, decided to take it one step further. I fired the bulldozer back up and carved a second trench. This one a deep rectangle right where they'd planned to put the archway. Piles of earth rose like miniature berms, blocking half the yard from view. "Are you insane?" Greg shouted over the roar of the engine. I grinned and gave him a thumbs up. By 10 o'clock, the HOA board had convened an emergency meeting on the sidewalk. I could see them gesturing wildly, pointing at my yard, then at clipboards, then at each other. Eventually, Greg stomped back to my porch. "Fine," he said. "You win. We'll relocate the wedding. But this is going to cost you." "No," I said calmly. "This is going to cost you. You tried to take my property by force. You're paying for every bit of damage to my lawn, plus my legal fees. You can't prove damages." I pointed to the crowd of neighbors filming with their phones. "I've got 50 witnesses and video from 6 angles. Go ahead. Tell a judge you tried to host a wedding in someone's yard without permission." Greg opened his mouth, closed it, and stomped away without another word. The guests started packing up chairs and decorations. Some gave me dirty looks. Others gave me a discreet thumbs up as they left. By noon, the cul-de-sac was empty again, except for me and the bulldozer. I climbed down, shut off the engine, and surveyed the wreckage. My yard was a disaster, but it was my disaster. And it felt good. By Monday morning, the HOA had already fired the first shot. A certified letter arrived, hand-delivered by Greg himself. Notice of fines, $200 per day for interference with a community event, $500 for property defacement visible from the street, $1,000 special assessment for reputational harm to the neighborhood. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. I walked outside and handed the letter back to Greg. "This is adorable," I said. "It's binding," Greg said through gritted teeth. "No," I said. "It's not. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to rescind these fines, issue a written apology, and reimburse me for the cost of regrading my yard, or I'm going to the county and filing a complaint for HOA overreach and harassment." "You wouldn't dare," he snapped. I smiled. "Watch me." That afternoon, I drove to the county recorder's office with my deed and the HOA's letter. The clerk didn't even blink. "Oh yeah," she said, flipping through the documents. "They don't have an easement on your property. They can't force you to allow access. Want to file a complaint?" "Yes, ma'am." By Wednesday, a county investigator was walking my property with a clipboard, shaking his head. "They've been using this as community space for years?" he asked. "That's what they say," I replied. "But I never agreed to it, and it's not in the title." "Well, then you're in the clear. If they try to enforce fines, you can sue." I could see Greg watching from across the street, seething. That night, I printed 50 copies of my deed and the plat map, highlighted the property lines, and went door to door. "Hey," I told each neighbor, "you should probably know the HOA just tried to host a wedding in my yard without permission, then fined me when I said no. Here's proof I own the land." Reactions were mixed. Some people were horrified. Others laughed. A few muttered about how Greg had gotten too big for his britches. By the end of the week, a rumor mill was in full swing. Someone started a group chat called Free Briarwood, where neighbors traded screenshots of the HOA's threats. A few even thanked me for standing up to them. Greg, of course, didn't take it lying down. At the next HOA board meeting, which I attended just for fun, Greg called the situation an unprecedented attack on community cohesion and proposed a new amendment, granting the HOA permanent use rights to all undeveloped portions of member properties for community events. "You're joking," I said, standing up. "This is a necessary step to protect the character of our neighborhood," Greg said. "You mean to protect your ability to throw parties on other people's property?" I shot back. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One woman raised her hand. "Greg, didn't you already get the HOA in trouble with the county over this? Why are we doubling down?" Greg's face turned purple. "Because if we don't, this man will ruin everything we've built here." "Everything you've built?" I said, laughing. "You mean your little fiefdom where you boss people around and use their yards for free?" The room erupted, and some people cheering, others shouting, "Order!" Greg barked, slamming his gavel. "We'll vote on the amendment at the next meeting." "Good luck getting a 2/3 majority," I called as I walked out. The next day, I received another letter, this one a cease and desist accusing me of inciting hostility against the HOA. I framed it and hung it in my hallway. Then I went a step further. I posted the letter, my deed, and a detailed timeline of events on the neighborhood Facebook group. The post blew up, dozens of comments, most siding with me. Someone even posted photos of me in the Bulldozer with the caption, "Local hero defends his castle." By the weekend, the Whitaker wedding debacle had become local legend. People stopped me at the grocery store to say they'd heard what happened. Someone left a 6-pack of beer on my porch with a note that said, "For the Trenchmaster." But Greg wasn't done yet. On Monday, I got a notice of mandatory mediation. The HOA was demanding $10,000 in damages for lost deposits and emotional distress caused to the wedding party. I called a lawyer. She took one look at the paperwork and laughed. "This is bluffing. They don't have a case." "Good," I said, "because I want to countersue for harassment." "Oh, we can definitely do that," she said, smiling. We filed the countersuit the next day. Greg must have gotten served around dinner time, because by 8 o'clock I heard shouting from across the street, "This is war!" He bellowed at someone I couldn't see. I just sat on my porch, sipping a beer, and smiled. The mediation session was scheduled for the following Friday. I showed up in jeans and a clean button-down. Greg arrived in a full suit, flanked by 2 HOA board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The mediator, a calm, gray-haired woman, went through the motions, outlining the HOA's demands. then asking for my response. My response, I said, sliding a folder across the table, is that I own the property in question, have never granted public use, and have suffered harassment and attempted trespass by the HOA. My lawyer has filed a countersuit seeking damages for emotional distress. Lost work hours and property restoration costs, Greg spluttered. He's making himself the victim when he's the one who destroyed his own lawn. The mediator raised a hand. Mr. Madsen, let's keep this professional. If the property was his to destroy, then it's not relevant here. Greg's face turned crimson. After 2 hours, the mediator gave up. You're too far apart. This will have to go before a judge. Fine by me. The court date was set for 6 weeks later, which gave me plenty of time to prepare. I gathered every photo, every video, every letter the HOA had sent. I even got statements from neighbors who were willing to testify that Greg had threatened them with fines for questioning him. The day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. Half the neighborhood had shown up to watch. Greg sat at the plaintiff's table looking like a man on the verge of a breakdown. His lawyer made a passionate argument about protecting community traditions and harm to neighborhood harmony. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood cool and calm and walked the judge through every piece of evidence, the deed, the plat map, the county investigator's report, and finally, she said, playing a video from someone's phone, "This is Mr. Collins on the day of the incident, warning the HOA president and board members that they were trespassing and would be held liable if they continued to enter his property." The video showed Greg waving his arms and shouting about community rights while I calmly pointed at my deed. The judge leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Madsen, do you have any documentation proving the HOA has legal access to this property?" Greg's lawyer shuffled papers, then shook his head. "No, Your Honor, but historically, history isn't law," the judge said sharply. "If it's not in the deed or covered by an easement, the HOA had no right to schedule an event on this property. Furthermore, attempting to fine a homeowner for refusing access is a violation of state HOA regulations." Greg looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. "I'm dismissing the HOA's claim with prejudice," the judge continued, "and awarding Mr. Collins $7,500 in damages plus attorney's fees. Furthermore, I am ordering the HOA to issue a written apology to Mr. Collins and all homeowners, clarifying the limits of their authority." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Greg's lawyer tried to object, but the judge banged his gavel. Decision stands. I walked out of that courthouse with the biggest grin of my life, but I wasn't done yet. The next HOA meeting was the largest in neighborhood history. The clubhouse was standing room only. Greg looked like a man headed for the gallows. "As you all know," he said stiffly, "the HOA has been ordered to pay damages to Mr. Collins. Dues will be raised by $20 per household for the next quarter to cover the cost." The room exploded. "Why should we pay for your mistake?" Someone shouted. "Yeah," another neighbor said. "You caused this mess, Greg. You should be the one paying." I acted in the interest of the community. Greg protested. "No," I said, standing up. "You acted in the interest of your ego. You could have respected my property from day one, but you didn't." People started clapping. "I move to remove Greg Madsen as HOA president," someone said from the back. "I second it," another neighbor chimed in. Within 5 minutes, a vote was taken. Greg was out. He stormed out of the clubhouse, slamming the door behind him. For a moment, the room was silent. Then someone started cheering. "Now," I said, grinning. "About that backyard." Everyone laughed. The following weekend, I invited the whole neighborhood over for a barbecue, in my yard, on my terms. The trenches had been filled, the grass reseeded, and the deck was strung with lights. Kids ran around, neighbors brought side dishes, and someone even brought a guitar. It wasn't just a party. It was a message. You can't bully someone out of what's theirs. As the sun went down and the last guest left, I stood on the deck with a beer looking out at my lawn. I'd bought this house for peace and quiet, but I'd gotten something better. Respect. The HOA would think twice before crossing me again. And Greg? Well, last I heard, he'd put his house on the market.